looking at the geology of that site and coming to the conclusion and publishing the conclusion that the Great Sphinx was subjected to about 1,000 years of extremely heavy rainfall.
Whenever we have to talk about ancient Egypt, pyramids can never be left out of the conversation, especially the Great Pyramid of Giza. And our knowledge of this particular pyramid is quite straightforward. The pyramid housed the bodies of different pharaohs. It was also a place where people could bring offerings to the deceased. In fact, the ancient Egyptians believed strongly that it helped pharaohs in their journey safely to the afterlife. But in recent times, we've found that it's way more complicated than that. The structure of the pyramid. The pyramid complex at Giza is a magnificent sight to behold, and it was such a daunting project that it took 3 different pharaohs to build it. The northernmost and oldest pyramid of the group was built for Khufu. The middle pyramid was built for Khafre, while the southernmost and last pyramid to be built was that of Menkaure. Khufu's pyramid, better known as the Great Pyramid of Giza, is probably the most massive single structure ever built on Earth. It's not just its size that's impressive, but also the attention to detail in its construction. The sides of the pyramid rise at a precise angle of 50 degrees, 52 inches, which is no small feat, and they are perfectly aligned with the 4 cardinal points of the compass. That kind of accuracy is mind-blowing, especially when you consider the tools they had at the time. The core of the pyramid is made of yellowish limestone blocks, which form a large part of the entire structure. Originally, it was covered with an outer layer of smoother, light-colored limestone, though most of that has been lost over the centuries. Inside, the passages are also made with this finer limestone, while the burial chamber was constructed with massive granite blocks. It's safe to say that the construction of the Great Pyramid is an entire puzzle on its own. Approximately 2.3 million massive blocks of stone were meticulously cut, transported, and assembled to create this structure, which weighs about 5.75 million tons. Looking at it, you can't help but admit that it's a masterpiece that demonstrates the extraordinary technical skill and engineering abilities of the ancient Egyptians. What's even more impressive is the precision of their craftsmanship. The internal walls, along with the few outer casing stones that still remain intact today, have joints that are finer and more precise than any other masonry work ever constructed in ancient Egypt. The entire structure has 2 main entrances, the original one, built during its construction, and a forced passage that was created later. These 2 entrances eventually come together at a junction inside the pyramid. From this point, there are 2 main paths to follow. One of them descends downward into the Subterranean Chamber, which is located deep beneath the pyramid. The other path ascends upward, taking you to the impressive Grand Gallery, which is a long, steep corridor. Once you reach the Grand Gallery, there are 3 different directions you can take. The first option is a vertical shaft that leads downward, passing by a small chamber known as the grotto, before eventually connecting back to the descending passage. The second option is a horizontal corridor that takes you to the Queen's Chamber. The third and final option is to continue up the Grand Gallery itself, which leads to the King's Chamber. This chamber is considered the most important room in the pyramid and contains the sarcophagus, where Pharaoh Khufu's remains were once thought to have been placed, but we'll get to that later. It's one thing to be fascinated by the structure itself. It's another to consider the amounts of manpower and labor that went into the massive structure. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus actually provides us with an interesting account of the construction of the Great Pyramid. According to him, it took about 20 years to complete this project, and it required the labor of 100,000 men. This figure seems plausible when you consider the working conditions and the seasonal nature of agricultural life at the time. It's also widely believed that these laborers were primarily agricultural workers who dedicated their efforts to building the pyramid during a specific period of the year. This would have been when the Nile River was in flood, a time when farming activities were put on hold because all the fields were submerged. During this downtime, they would have been available to contribute to massive public works like the construction of the pyramid. By the late 20th century, however, archaeologists began to uncover new evidence that challenged the earlier idea of a massive seasonal workforce. Instead, they found signs suggesting that a smaller, more specialized workforce may have lived and worked at the site on a permanent basis. And according to this revised theory, it's now believed that as few as 20,000 skilled workers, supported by a network of additional personnel, would have been sufficient to complete the monumental task. These support staff likely included bakers to provide food, physicians to tend to injuries, priests to perform rituals, and others who ensured the workers had everything they needed to stay productive. And history has it that they created the most mysterious structure on Earth: the mysteries of the Great Pyramid. Over the years, scientists and curious explorers have uncovered and are still uncovering findings in the Great Pyramid. But it would appear that the more they look, the more they see, except that they couldn't exactly see this one. It's a hidden, invisible door. According to popular legend, the pyramid once had a massive swivel door that weighed 20 tons. What's really interesting about this door is that it could only be opened from the inside. From the outside, though, it was completely invisible, and it blended in so perfectly with the rest of the pyramid that you'd never even know it was there. However, when scientists were examining the Great Pyramid of Giza in 1837, they discovered something even more unexpected. 4 other mysterious chambers were discovered just right above the king's chamber, thanks to tunneling. However, archaeologists now assert that these chambers served only a structural function, and all they did was reduce the weight of the pyramid's stones and prevent the crushing of the king's chamber below. Another mystery that scientists have been captivated by is the red painted hieroglyphs covering the walls of these chambers, and from their findings, these symbols were not meant to be seen by the public or ceremonial use. Rather, the laborers who built the pyramid left them behind, and upon further inspection, they appeared to be unofficial notes or identifying marks. The inscriptions seemed to carry the names of the different labor crews or gangs that contributed to the structure's construction. The pharaoh's name was also frequently used in words that these gangs used to refer to themselves. One of them was translated into English and said, "The gang, the White Crown of Khnum Khufu, is powerful." Besides this particular instance, they noticed that Pharaoh Khufu's name was mentioned more than a dozen other times. One could almost tell that they simply loved and adored him. In fact, the ancient Egyptians believed that the pharaohs were not just any rulers. Rather, they were thought to be direct descendants of the gods, or possibly even gods themselves. The pharaohs themselves felt obligated to uphold peace and order in the world, and they were viewed as strong intermediaries between the gods and the people. But that's not all. Archaeologist Goyon also discovered similar writings about Khufu on an outer block of the pyramid's 4th layer, as well as some other structures that have been linked to him, such as the harbor at Wadi al-Jarf and the alabaster quarry at Hatnub, which means that these workers frequently used writing as a means of expressing their emotions. And one important detail is that these locations were used for moving supplies needed to build the pyramid, and so the builders would appear there regularly too. And just when scientists believed they had figured out everything there was to know about the Great Pyramid, they made another quite astounding find in 1877. It was discovered that the pyramid is exactly in the middle of the Earth's land masses. Basically, it means that the pyramid is located where the longest latitude and longitude lines that may traverse the Earth meet. Everything about this pyramid is almost as though it had all been carefully planned and positioned there at that precise moment. To top it all up, there is an ancient belief that links the necropolis, the burial site of the pharaohs, and the lowering of the sun. People believed that the sun's descent helped the pharaohs reach eternity and guided them on their trip to the afterlife. Can you now guess the location of the Great Pyramid? The exact spot where the sun goes down in Egypt. That's really a side note. The true puzzle lies in how precisely they line up. According to research, the four major cardinal points, north, south, east, and west, are directly addressed by their sides. However, this next discovery may cross out all prior discoveries. An enormous granite coffer that archaeologists have not been able to explain was found inside the Great Pyramid's main chamber. At first glance, it seemed like a big stone box sitting in the room, and it didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary. However, upon measuring it, archaeologists discovered that the coffer was much too big to have fit through the little entry. So how did it enter exactly? Many people have come up with many theories to explain this, but none of them have been validated. One theory is that the entire construction may have been constructed around the coffer, since it was positioned inside the chamber before the pyramid was finished. Others speculate that after completion, the ancient architects may have had a psychic way of moving it into the chamber. No one can confirm how it got there, even after years of investigation and several attempts to provide answers. The coffer is actually entirely empty, and there is no proof that it has ever been used to hold a treasure or a body. Some scholars even speculate that it may have served a ceremonial function, while others assume it was merely a step in the pharaoh's funeral. Now, what secrets do each of the three chambers in the pyramid hold? The pyramid's chambers. The king's chamber is the highest of the three main chambers inside the Great Pyramid, and it's actually one of the most fascinating parts of the structure. The entire chamber is lined with granite, and its dimensions are really impressive too, measuring 20 cubits, which is about 10.5 meters from east to west, and 10 cubits, which is around 5.2 meters from north to south. The ceiling of the chamber is flat and sits at about 11 cubits and 5 digits high, which translates to roughly 5.8 meters or 19 feet above the floor. It's made up of 9 enormous stone slabs, and together, these slabs weigh an astonishing 400 tons. Over time, though, the weight and settling of the structure have caused cracks to form in all of the roof beams. Experts believe this is due to the chamber having shifted slightly by about 2 to 5 centimeters. The walls of the chamber are made up of 5 layers of stone blocks, a design feature common in burial chambers built during the 4th dynasty. However, these blocks are completely uninscribed, which was common practice for royal burial chambers of the time. But what is most interesting is the precision with which these massive stones were fitted together. The builders took great care to ensure that the blocks aligned perfectly on the visible surfaces. However, the technique of finishing is quite different. Some of the stone faces are dressed with meticulous attention to detail, while others show signs of lifting bosses that were never fully cut away. Lifting bosses are basically protrusions used to maneuver the heavy stones during construction. On the hidden sides of the blocks, though, it's a different story. The back faces were roughly hewn and left in a much less finished state. This was a common practice with Egyptian hard stone facade blocks and was likely done to save time and effort, as those sides would never be visible. The Queen's Chamber, on the other hand, is located right in the middle of the pyramid, halfway between its north and south sides. It's a rectangular room that measures about 5.2 meters from north to south and 5.8 meters from east to west. The ceiling is pointed and reaches a height of 6.3 meters at its highest point. In 1872, British engineer Wayneman Dixon made a surprising discovery in the Queen's Chamber. He found shafts in both the north and south walls of the chamber, which he believed were similar to those already identified in the King's Chamber. Dixon's assumption was based on the idea that such features were likely part of the pyramid's overall design. However, unlike the shafts in the King's Chamber, these ones didn't connect to the outer faces of the pyramid, nor did they open directly into the Queen's Chamber itself. What makes Dixon's discovery even more interesting is what he found inside one of these shafts. He unearthed 3 objects: a ball made of diorite, a bronze, and a piece of cedar wood. The purpose of these items is still unclear, but the most likely possibility is that they are tools or materials that might have been involved in the construction of the pyramid, or perhaps they even served a symbolic or ritualistic purpose. Again, in 1933, the shafts in the Queen's Chamber were explored in a groundbreaking way by the German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink. He used a specially designed crawler robot named Upuaut-2 to explore the shafts. This robot was capable of navigating the narrow spaces inside the pyramid that would be impossible for humans to pass through. After climbing 213 feet up one of the shafts, Gantenbrink made a remarkable discovery. One of the shafts was blocked by a limestone door. This door was a solid slab of stone, and it had 2 copper handles that were severely eroded until today. Its purpose isn't known. Then, in September 2002, the National Geographic Society took the investigation further by creating a similar robot designed to continue the work Gantenbrink had started. This new robot drilled a small hole into the southern door and discovered that there was, in fact, another stone slab hidden behind it. Was this perhaps a secret vault that only the Pharaohs knew about? And what exactly were they trying to hide? Well, we may have found it in the Subterranean Chamber. The Subterranean Chamber. Of all the chambers in the Great Pyramid, the Subterranean Chamber is not only the largest, but also the most mysterious. It is up to 46 feet long and 27 feet wide, and it's carved right into the limestone bedrock. There's something about its raw, unfinished look that makes it hard for scientists to describe and even harder to understand. The entrance to the chamber is tucked near the floor at the northeast corner, where the descending passageway leads directly into it. In the middle of the floor, near the east wall, there is a square pit measuring 6 feet wide, shaped like a funnel. This pit isn't just a surface-level feature, it's actually the opening of a vertical shaft that goes down about 11 feet deep. However, back in 1816, the Italian explorer Count Caviglia decided to drill even deeper into this pit, and so it extended by another 30 feet. The western half of the chamber has been carved out in a way that makes it stand nearly 6 feet higher than the eastern half, and now there's a noticeable difference in elevation. This elevated section has also been sculpted into several large, fin-like protrusions that give the space a unique appearance compared to the other parts of the chamber. These protrusions all run in an east-to-west direction and are nearly as tall as the ceiling itself, and you can't help but notice their sizes and shapes. What's even more mysterious is that there is a step channel located between these massive protrusions. It begins at the floor and flows toward the back of the chamber, almost as if guiding something, though exactly what it could be is still uncertain. At the center of the chamber, there is a channel that stretches all the way to the western wall, serving as a distinct feature of the space. And over in the southeastern corner, there's a tunnel known as the dead-end shaft. This tunnel is relatively narrow, measuring just 30 inches in both height and width. It runs south for 57 feet before it abruptly ends at a solid wall, and that just raises questions about why exactly it's there. In addition to these features, there are two other elements within the Great Pyramid that seem to be part of the work done in the bedrock. These include the well shaft, a vertical passage connecting different levels of the pyramid, and the grotto, a mysterious cavity that continues to confuse researchers. If the subterranean chamber was nothing more than a mistake, an abandoned attempt to create a burial vault, then it means a massive amount of effort and resources were wasted for no real reason. That seems hard to believe, considering how precise and intentional the rest of the Great Pyramid's design is. But if the chamber wasn't a mistake, and it was actually meant to be there, then what was its purpose? What function could it have served? Everything from a tomb to a temple of initiation to some kind of advanced device. There has never been a shortage of theories over the years about what the Great Pyramid of Giza and the other pyramids were originally designed for. People have speculated endlessly about their purpose. But despite all the creative ideas and hypotheses, one major thing seems to be missing. A theory that explains why all the ancient Egyptian pyramids were built in the first place. However, John Cadman may have the answers we're looking for. Cadman's Model of the Great Pyramid. To the best of our knowledge, no one has ever built a complete, accurate scale model of the Great Pyramid. It seems rather surprising, considering the many theories that have been proposed about what the pyramid could have been. But here's the thing: without a clear understanding of what the Great Pyramid actually was, or if it was some kind of advanced device, there would be no real basis for a theory to even test. And that's where marine engineer John Cadman came in. He noticed something that had been overlooked for decades. Then, in 1962, a man named Edward Kunkel published a book titled The Pharaohs' Pump, where he put forward an intriguing theory that the Great Pyramid was, in fact, a giant water pump. One day, while browsing through titles in a used bookstore, a man called Cadman stumbled upon a book that caught his attention. It was Edward Kunkel's The Pharaohs' Pump. He was really curious about the premise, so he decided to purchase the book and give it a read. After diving into it, Cadman quickly realized that Kunkel's theory that the Great Pyramid could have been a massive water pump wasn't as far-fetched as it initially sounded. In fact, Cadman thought Kunkel was onto something. Having a strong background in hydraulics and experience with machines that rely on hydraulic systems, Cadman couldn't help but notice that the design of the Great Pyramid's subterranean chamber, along with its associated tunnels, seemed strangely familiar. The more he thought about it, the more he began to see parallels between the pyramid's features and the kinds of hydraulic systems he had worked with. Before the invention of the electric water pump, the ram pump was the go-to method for moving water from one place to another. It was a simple but effective system that relied on just two moving parts: a weight-loaded waste valve and a check valve. The beauty of the ram pump was its efficiency and simplicity. It didn't need any electricity or complex machinery. Instead, it relied purely on the force of gravity. It was simple. Water in a reservoir would flow down the input pipe, using gravity to generate enough pressure to force the waste valve closed. It's a clever solution that has been used for centuries. And once the waste valve is closed, the water continues to flow down the input pipe, but now the pressure inside the pump starts to build up. As the pressure increases, it forces the delivery valve to open, which pushes the water into the output pipe. This is where the clever part of the design comes in. Because the water is being forced into the output pipe at a faster rate and to a higher elevation than the water flowing down the input pipe, the flow of water actually reverses. This sudden change in direction causes the check valve to close, which seals off the system momentarily. Once the check valve is closed, the process starts all over again. Inspired by Kunkel's work, Cadman dedicated himself to learning as much as he could about the pyramid's design, particularly focusing on how it could function as a water pump. By June of 1999, he was ready to take the next step and create his first model of the system. However, things didn't go quite as planned. The model leaked, and then it cracked, and the whole thing just failed to work as he had hoped. But Cadman didn't give up. Several months later, he began working on a second model, convinced that he was close to figuring it out. This time, he connected a new line to the bottom of the pit shaft, believing this new line was crucial, as it would serve as the pressurized output. Yet despite his efforts, the pump still didn't operate the way he thought it should, which left him frustrated but determined. Not one to quit, he pressed on and started working on a third model. After months of refining his design and testing different configurations, Cadman finally completed the third model on April 3, 2000. To his relief, this one worked flawlessly. And just for the sake of improvement and revolution, Cadman reached the fourth model. And so, at the end of the day, Cadman's theory states that the process starts with an aqueduct, which brings a steady flow of water to the pyramid's entrance. From there, the water flows down the descending passageway, making its way into the subterranean chamber located. As the water enters the subterranean chamber, it begins to fill up, starting with the pit at the bottom. Eventually, the chamber becomes completely saturated with water, leaving no room for any more to enter. At this point, the water starts pushing back against the descending passageway because it has nowhere else to go. The weight and pressure of the water rushing down the passage force it to find an alternative path, which ends up being the well shaft. Since the well shaft offers less resistance than the descending passage, the water is naturally pushed upward through it. According to Cadman, it could be operational today if all the tunnels associated with the pyramid could be cleared for the water to pass through. However, the critics have been a really tough crowd. Are all these pyramids just nothing but water pumps? If you enjoyed this exploration, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our other interesting videos. And let us know in the comments what fascinates you most about the Great Pyramid. See you next time.